So hello everyone and welcome. My name is Christy Gelling. I'm a research officer in the Parliamentary Research Service, and today we're going to be talking about socio-economic disadvantage in New South Wales electorates. So sorry, my apologies if I get a bit croaky sometimes. I'm recovering from a cough and I may need to drink a lot of water today. And just a reminder that we're recording, I hope. Yes, we are recording. So I live and work on the lands of the Gadigal and Wangal peoples of the Eora Nation, and many of you are joining us from the lands of other Aboriginal peoples, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all these lands and pay my respects to their elders. I also recognise the fact that using census data is a very narrow way to try to understand disadvantage, but nonetheless it's a tool available to us, and I hope today to leave you knowing more about what it can and can't show. So the Parliamentary Research Service, we provide impartial research to members of Parliament, including publishing statistics calculated at the New South Wales electorate level, such as our newly released data brief on socio-economic disadvantage. And so today I'm going to be giving you a brief introduction to the data set used for the data brief called SEIFA and how to interpret it. So feel free at any stage to put questions in the chat and we'll stop to answer those. And then I'll give you a demonstration of the data visualizations and some tips and tricks on how to use them well. And then I'll take any additional questions after that. So what is SEIFA? The SEIFA indexes are long-standing, well-tested and widely used measures of disadvantage in Australia, developed by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And ABS defines relative socio-economic advantage and disadvantage as people's access to material and social resources and their ability to participate in society. So as you can imagine, it's not a particularly easy thing to measure because it's a multi-dimensional concept for a start that can't be well represented just by one variable such as income. So SEIFA stands for Socio-Economic Indexes for Areas. ABS calculates a SEIFA index score for a geographic area using lots of different types of census data. And these scores are then used to rank areas by their relative advantage or disadvantage. So SEIFA can be used, for example, to determine eligibility for some kinds of funding. It's used in market research and for academic and other types of population research. Now, ABS doesn't actually calculate SEIFA indexes at the electorate level, so we've commissioned them to provide us with that data for you all to use. And what would you use it for? SEIFA data is especially useful for providing context when you're looking at other issues. So let's say you're considering schools data, health or unemployment stats, you'll frequently find that socioeconomic data correlates with many of those things. It can also help visualize where services may be needed or where they may need to be tailored to suit local needs. So I'm not going to describe how the indexes are calculated, but basically they combine information from lots of census variables to produce a score on an arbitrary scale where the average is set to be 1,000. So to be clear, there are no units of disadvantage, and an area with an index score of 500 is not twice as disadvantaged as another area with a score of 1,000. Basically, scores aren't particularly useful by themselves. Their main purpose is a method for ranking the areas in question. So to analyse SEIFA data, ABS recommends the use of quantiles such as deciles. And what is a decile? So if you have a ranked list of areas, like electorates, and you divide the list into 10 equally sized groups, so that means an equal number of electorates, each of those groups is a decile. And decile 1 will contain the 10% of electorates that are most disadvantaged, and decile 2 will contain the next most disadvantaged electorates, and so on. There are actually 4 separate SEIFA indexes. Each uses somewhat different variables in the calculation. However, for simplicity, the data brief focuses only on the disadvantage index, which considers only variables that provide a signal of disadvantage. So, which means that if there are parts of an area, say an electorate, with high levels of advantage, that doesn't actually affect its score, only the disadvantage affects it. Okay, so interpreting SEIFA data, there's a lot to say about it. I try to confine myself to what are the 5 essential things that you need to understand when you're looking at this data brief. So the first is that this is a relative index. It's not an absolute measure. If you remember only one thing that I say today, it's that when we look at all the colours on the maps and the tables, the maps are summarising ranks. So this is just rank information. The second important thing is that it is calculated for areas, not individuals. So a person can't have a SEIFA score, only an area. And thirdly, the ABS is constrained by what data is available from the census. So that includes things like income, employment, and education, but it doesn't include, for example, wealth, assets, the local availability of infrastructure, the local cost of living, crime, pollution, and other things you might be able to think of. So another important constraint is timing. And so it's important to note that the most recent available SEIFA data is from the 2021 census. So it's a snapshot. And fourth, the SEIFA is not designed to be compared over time. The index is calculated fresh for each census, and there are differences in the methodology each time. That means you can't compare scores between years. If you do want to compare over time, the only way to do it is by looking at decile, and you do still have to be cautious even then. And finally, the bigger the area that is the basis of comparison, the more variation that you're going to be summarising across. So you need to remember that it's a summary. And you will see what this looks like when we do the demonstration and have a look at the map. But before I launch into that demonstration, I just wanted to quickly check if anybody has any questions or things they're confused about that you want me to clear up first. Sounds like no, and we will head into the demonstration. Okay. So is everybody seeing the research service homepage? Okay, so the easiest way, so okay, I did actually provide, sorry, I'll switch back to PowerPoint for a second. There is a QR code there if you need to look at it on your phone, but I would recommend using a computer instead. It's a lot easier to use. And the easiest way to find the data brief is just to go to the Parliament homepage and then click the Research Papers tab, which is just this one here. That will bring you to our homepage. And this one here is the Socio-Economic Disadvantage Data Brief. Just earlier today, we published a new data brief on public and private schools. And next Thursday, there will also be a lunchtime briefing on that one. We have actually, if you click on electorates, we have a lot of other electorate level data available. And here is the SEIFA data brief. So at the top, we have shortcuts to the different data visualizations available. We have a dashboard that is good for getting quick stats for your electorate, the maps for looking at geographic variation, interactive tables for ranking. We've got information on how to interpret the data for those people who haven't joined the session today. And we have a download section where there's a more extensive range of data available for those who want to go on a bit of a deep dive. But you can also just scroll down to reach the dashboard. So as I said, so it's not the greatest experience necessarily looking at this data brief on a mobile, particularly for this dashboard section. So I've provided a reformatted version for mobile that you can switch to if you're on the run. We're going to move away from Albury because they're always on display in our data briefs, and we'll head to the other end of the alphabet and choose Wyong. Now, this is showing that Wyong has been assigned to the Central Coast region, and the top part of the dashboard is showing you data from the Disadvantage Index. So remember, we're only looking at the one type of SEIFA index in these data visualizations. So Wyong is ranked 18 out of 93 electorates, where 1 is the most disadvantaged, and that puts it in decile 2, which is effectively in the most disadvantaged 20% of electorates. We've also provided, so that's the 2021 decile, we've also provided the 2011 decile, which was 3. Now, don't forget that you can't compare scores between years, but for exploratory purposes, you may be interested in looking at that decile change over time. Now, this change of 1 is pretty typical for something like an electorate. They rarely change more than 1, maybe 2 deciles over 10 years, and that's because it's a relative scale where you're looking at what you're talking about here is how it ranks compared to other electorates. But a reminder that doesn't mean that everything conditions have stayed still over those 10 years. So we added another part to the dashboard down the bottom to give you a sense of the trends in the census variables underlying the disadvantage index. And there are 15 variables that we use to calculate the 2021 disadvantage index, but we've just chosen the top 3 in terms of their weighting in the calculation. So these are the 3 that effectively have the most influence. Doesn't mean the other variables don't have influence, it's just these 3 are a good sort of sample to have a look at. So for each of those variables in dark blue, we show the trend between 2011 and 2021 for the electorate. And you can compare that in pink to the region, and light blue is the state. And the 3 variables are the proportion of people in the electorate living in low-income households, the proportion of families in the electorate with children whose parents are jobless, and the proportion of people in the electorate who have no Year 12 education or higher than that. So you can see that, okay, so the decile hasn't changed too much in that time, but things have generally improved in this electorate and more widely across the state. For example, in this variable about no Year 12 or higher education, that proportion has decreased in every electorate over that time. So there are 2 things about these graphs, though, that I want you to watch out for. The first is the vertical axis is scaled to show the pattern, to show the trends, which means that it change. If you keep an eye on it, it will change when you change electorates. So you just want to pay attention to what's the magnitude of the changes that you're looking at. The other thing is that this variable about low-income households, well, the dollar threshold for what counts as a low-income household is not the same every year. And so it can be a little bit, the shape of that the shape of that trend can be influenced by changes in threshold. So it can be confusing to interpret the shape, but I think what's important here is the comparison of the trend of the electorate here, if you have a look at how that compares to the trend in the region and the state, and that was going to be more informative for you on that variable. And you can see in this case, Wallandilly has a relatively similar trend to the state as a whole in that variable. I wanted to give you an example where that doesn't happen. So you can search in this drop-down area, you can search for an electorate if you want to skip straight to it. Now, Londonderry is one of those very rare electorates whose decile has changed noticeably between 2011 and 2021. In 2011, it was in decile 2, so in the 20% most disadvantaged electorates. In 2021, it was at 6, and it was effectively pretty close to the state average. So in that time, it became apparent, it seems to have become less a disadvantage relative to other electorates. And it does seem from the graphs of the census variables to fit that pattern. So particularly for this no year 12 or higher education variable, the electorate in dark blue seems to be coming down close to the state average more quickly than the state as a whole. So looking at those variables can help give you a little bit more detail on what's going on, what has been going on in the electorate in that time. So if you keep scrolling, now we come to our 2 maps. We have one that is at the SA1 level, so these are smaller areas, and the colouring is showing the decile across where the decile is calculated across all SA1s in the state. So this is not per electorate, this is ranking all of the SA1s in the states and giving them a decile based on that. We also have the electorate deciles. And if you click on an electorate, you can see, say, for example, Barwon as decile 1 and Orange is decile 5. And those kinds of differences aren't necessarily obvious from looking just at the SA1 map. Something that you'll probably notice pretty quickly is these are 2 separate maps. So let's say you zoom in on the electorate details, switch back to the SA1 map, and you'll find the zoom level is back where you left it. Luckily, however, you can find places, you can zoom straight to a place that you might need by searching for an address or a landmark, not an electorate, but pretty much anything else will work. And a hot tip is don't just type in something and hit enter. In this case, we've ended up in Parliament, Oregon. So what you do if you accidentally do that is you hit this home icon here and it will take you back to New South Wales. So instead you should be, you should select from the options that are given to you. So we'll head down to Parliament where I am today. And if we zoom out, you can see the boundaries of the electorate are in orange. And again, you can click on an SA1 and it will tell you the decile, the SA1 rank, and also the name of the surrounding SA2 area. So in this case, what this means, a reminder, the SA1 decile is 10, means that it is among the SA1s that the 10% of SA1s in the state that are the least disadvantaged. So it's not a ranking within the electorate, it's within the state. You can see nearby, you will have another SA1 that's at the opposite end. It is in the 10% most disadvantaged in the state. These white areas, such as where Parliament is located, don't have SEIFA data calculated. There are various reasons why ABS doesn't calculate a SEIFA score for an SA1. It's usually because it's not a residential area. So you'll find you can spend quite a bit of time playing around with the patterns on this map. The next visualization are the tables. So we've got two tables. We've got electorates and regions. And so for both tables, the columns are all of the columns are sortable. So this is where you would come if you wanted to know, for example, which of the electorates are in decile 1. We also have the scores available, as well as the minimum and maximum scores. So that refers to the SA1s within that electorate. So for example, in Liverpool, the SA1 with the lowest score in Liverpool had a score of 280, and vice versa for the highest score. And you can see when you sort on that having SA1s with particularly low scores doesn't always correspond to being an electorate with a low decile. So then we have that interpreting the data section, including the list of variables that are used for calculating the index. And finally, we have two sets of data for download. We have the download index data gives you the 4 SEIFA indexes, so not just the disadvantage index, and it covers between 2001 and 2021. My final reminder that not to compare scores across censuses. It's you want to look only at deciles, and again, it's more for exploratory purposes. If you find an interesting trend in your index deciles, you might then want to take a look at the census variables underlying those scores. So we've also provided the 15 census variables used in calculating the 2021 disadvantage index between 2011 and 2021. So I'm sure you can have lots of fun with that. And so we're going to stop for questions now, but I also wanted to just point out this very quick and easy feedback survey that would be really helpful to us if you just let us know if we're on the right track. And also a reminder that you can email us at any time with any questions about this data brief or any of our publications. So do we have any questions? No problem. Yeah, as I said, do let us know what you thought on the survey, and very happy to answer any questions offline or help you to find what you need.